pretty sure if I ever write a book in life, it's going to be called It's Not About You. And that's because most of my career has now been focused on engagement work, which is really about like, how do you champion this customer perspective? But because of that, I've had to practice this muscle of recognizing when, and it's ultimately about like cultivating self-awareness, right? But when am I a success point? When am I like propellant, or when am I like creating a barrier to what I'm trying to accomplish, right? And I thought about this in the context of how friendships work, and I thought about this as like how the creative process. And I think I've got a couple tips that are going to be helpful, right? Because there's these friends, and I think you all will have some of these friends who you've met somebody and they just seem to know lots of different people, right? And those people all seem to be pretty cool. They have this gravity about them. And those friendships that are part of that gravity well, right, are real. And I'm a science nerd, so gravity wells, hey. But those friendships are really part of how you have these creative breakthrough moments, right? Because there are these spots where it's not about the work that you're doing, it's not about the work that they're doing. It's really about this sort of creative process, and the ego starts to take a back seat to the work. And when that happens, right, that gets really, really powerful. And so those relationships are something that I really want to share with you, right? And what's most important, like I've been really lucky to have those kind of relationships in my life. That's actually one of the reasons I'm speaking to you today, is because Maxim is one of those relationships for me in my life. But I share this with people, and I share that I have these kind of relationships, and they always say, well, James, you're so lucky. Well, I'm not, right? The reality is that there are active and intentional things that I am doing to help cultivate and build these relationships. And so I wanted to share those with some of you, and I hope that this will help you kind of take some next steps in the creative relationships that you want to foster in your life. All right, slide changed, just to confirm, a nod.
Just to let you know, James, I think we can see your speaker notes.
Oh, you can see my speaker notes as well. How wonderful.
Yes.
Well,
sorry.
I'll
but if there's a way you can change it for just your PowerPoint, I think the.
All right. So I'll do this without speaker notes, because apparently I cannot do this with speaker notes on Google as well. So we can see the document. Yes. Perfect. Yeah. All right. This is going to be fun. All right. So this will be great. I haven't practiced this without speaker notes. This just got fabulously more interesting for everyone. So when you think about interactions that happen in your life, right? There's this kind of paradigm. There's a span, right? And some of these are by chance, and some of these are about manipulation, right? And when you think about chance, they're like this kismet serendipity moment. You're like, oh my gosh, like this person's working on this thing, and I'm working on this thing that's great. And like, oh, life is good. And then there's manipulation, and we can all think of some great negative examples of manipulation. I won't call that out here, but the reality is that it's a spectrum. And I don't know about you, but I don't really want to trust my best friend relationships, or the relationships that I find the most beneficial to me, or the relationships with my loved ones, to chance. And at the same time, I don't want to be that person that's manipulating people that I care about, or people that I have got common interests in. That's not the goal either, right? The goal here is to recognize that emotions are inherently neutral, right? And so I can find joy in something wonderful. There's a word, Schadenfreude, right? I can find joy in something that is somebody else's misery. That emotion in and of itself is neutral. And so what happens here, and the key principle that I want to start with from the very beginning in this talk, is that your motives absolutely matter, right? We do not want to be that person that is manipulating everyone. This is not a talk for like how to like get everyone to feel the way you feel and things like that. This is about recognizing that self-awareness of, am I doing this for the right reasons? Am I doing this from a humanitarian perspective? Is my goal one that is of honest and interest? And so principle number one, motives matter, right? And I'm going to give you a little bit of a template and a playbook here of these sort of like 4 personas that I adopt over time. But the first persona is always, I am a good human, right? And if you need to tell this to yourself some days, that's okay. I get really bad road rage. I yell at the person who just like cut me off. We're all bad humans sometimes. But in this moment, for this relationship, your first step is to realize, I am a good human. I am doing this for a good reason. right? And again, emotions are neutral. It's okay to be happy. It's okay to be upset. It's okay to have success. It's okay to have setbacks. It comes from this place of let's be neutral, but let's come from a good place. So we have good intent, right? Step one, we have good intent. We are a good human. Step two is really about removing the ego and removing this element for competition. So this is a very famous restaurant in Tel Aviv and down in Yafo area, and it's called Dr. Shakshuka, right? And it is like the place, if you ever go to Israel, you go to this place because they've been making shakshuka for years and it's like world renowned and it's pretty darn good joint. So I love to cook. And for me, I really love to cook great food, right? By the way, this is shakshuka. I didn't make this. It's beautiful though. I couldn't do it, right? So, but the whole idea is that my wife also loves to cook, right? And also enjoys cooking. And she's from Israel and she's used to cooking these dishes on a regular basis. And so I've actually stepped back from cooking anything to do with shakshuka, right? Like, yes, the chef in me is like, oh, I want to make this and I want to constantly make it better. And I eat her version. I'm like, oh, what would I do differently? But that's not engaging in a way that's allowing her to build herself up, right? And so there's this split and this difference of when am I curious? Like I love cooking a new dish. Like this is a cuisine that I'm not used to, but I don't want to be competitive about it, right? And so this is a very personal example of this idea of curiosity versus competition. And so when you are curious about something, yes, you're interested. Yes, there's passion. There's that moment of like, oh, like that's kind of cool. But there's also that aspect of it's not about me. Like my ego's not involved, right? And I just want to, like, again, science nerd, but number one, the best selfie in the history of humankind right here, Curiosity taking its own selfie. Ellen DeGeneres can, totally doesn't work. It's not hers. I know this was like the selfie that broke the internet, but it is Curiosity that is the most important one. So that being said, right, like your curiosity is a difference. And I think we can all this is one of those things like people inherently get, so I won't belabor this too much, but when you are in competition with somebody, there's a conquering element, right? I don't know about you, but any great relationship you've had probably doesn't come from conquering somebody, right? Like it comes from this aspect of like, I'm interested in what you do. I'm interested in who you are. And that removal of the ego and that like my shakshuka versus my wife's shakshuka, or, like my blog readership versus John, I'm going to assume you have a blog, John's readership in that's not important. The point is we're both interested in things. Like we can both be nerds about the Curiosity rover on Mars, right? For example. So how do you take that idea and kind of like keep it in your head? Like what's the next tent pole? Curiosity is all about being a problem solver and a puzzle solver, right? So we started off with good intent and now we're putting on this puzzle solver hat. And the reason why we're doing this and the reason why I use this sort of persona as the one to adopt is because this puzzle solver persona is the one that's going to help you think about, well, what does Maeve have in common with me? And then how can we find something that we're both interested in? What does John have in common with me and something that we're both interested in, right? It's that moment where you're going from what am I good at, right? Which is, like I feel good about what I'm good at. Like I feel good about cooking, but it's not important. What is important is that common bond. And so you put on that puzzle solver hat because you're starting to find those common connections where you can have a deeper level of conversation and you can find non-competitive footing to talk through. Make sense so far? Couple smiling faces, nothing in the chat pod so far as I can see. All right, so we're gonna play a little game just for a second here because I don't know, it seems fun and it's interactive. So we're gonna normalize a relationship, right? And what I mean by that is I'm gonna present you with 3 scenarios. We did a little Family Feud style, but we're gonna give you 3 different scenarios, and I asked 5 of my friends whether or not they would tell this generally to their spouse, to their colleague, or to a friend of theirs, right? And so based upon whether or not I got 3 out of 5 or 1 out of 5 or what have you, like you'll see a plus or a minus depending on if that's something you feel comfortable with. But as you go along with me, I want you to think about, I couldn't figure out how to get over my blank canvas problem. Is this something you feel comfortable telling a friend? Is this something you feel comfortable talking about with a spouse? Is this something you feel comfortable talking about with a colleague? So I went through it a little too quickly. To the actual answers from the survey, right? Survey says, I can't figure out how to get over my blank canvas problem. Most of the people I talk to, sample size of 5, friends, yeah, okay, we've all been there, right? Spouse, man, I'm just having a really hard time gaining traction on this problem. That also made sense. Colleague, oh, no, like that's a weakness, right? Like what if they can use that against me the next time I'm in a meeting with the boss? Like there's a big hesitancy there, right? There's a big barrier there. Next question, next scenario. I made a great trade in the market today and I made $100,000, 100,000 pounds, wherever you happen to be in the world, pick your currency of choice, in one day, right? Like, that's really cool. I wouldn't tell that to my friend. What if they had a bad day? What if, like we don't talk about money? That's not something that's comfortable. I might tell that to my spouse. That's something we want to celebrate and be excited about together. Maybe, you want to hide that and go buy a really nice Corvette or something. I don't know. Probably not a good thing for your relationship, but generally speaking, colleague, also not a moment, right? Like I don't want to have that conversation with a colleague. Like I don't talk about money at work. I'll do one last one here. I had a really bad day at work. My boss totally yelled at me for not getting something done, right? Friends seem to be okay. Spouse, what if they judge me? Like what if they aren't comfortable? Like what if they think a little bit less of me? What if they start worrying about my paycheck being there or not, right? Colleagues, oh my gosh, absolutely not. Never show weakness to people you work with, right? And the answers of these don't necessarily matter. I think the point to take away in this is that if you think about those different scenarios in your life, what you're going to see is that you have these rules and you have these sort of segments that you're putting people in that are bucketing how you're having those conversations and when you talk about what. And the whole point of a truly open and honest and creative relationship is that those lines will blur a little bit. Not necessarily, like, obviously you're not gonna like get married to a bunch of people, but you want to be the person that people want to share with, right? You want to be that person that no matter if it's a good thing or a bad thing, you are there for them. And so the persona I want you to think about and the step I want you to think about, the hat I want you to put on, is that of a cheerleader. And the question is like, why a cheerleader, right? And I know we're a little bit on the time side, but normally I'd pause here and I'd say, well, like if you think about a cheerleader, are they focused on the game or are they focused on the crowd? Right? Like where is their attention in that moment? And the reality is, if you think about this, a cheerleader, if the team is up 50 points, is supportive and enthusiastic and encouraging. The team is down 50 points. The cheerleader is enthusiastic and encouraging and supportive, right? The cheerleader is constant. And this is really important, right? Because you're removing this aspect of judgment. You're removing this aspect of, hey, you did something and I'm going to judge you for that. I'm going to have that moment of like, I'm just going to be there for you and I'm going to celebrate your wins and I'm going to work with you or not work with you on your losses, right? Like one of the questions I always ask when I have those kind of phone calls and people like are like, hey man, I had a really tough day. I'm like, great. Hey, do you want me to listen or do you want me to help problem solve? Right? And it's about that aspect of I'm stepping out from what I might want to do, which is like naturally I want to jump in. But I'm just asking them what they need, right? I'm asking them how to be their cheerleader in that moment. So that next hat is, how do I be a cheerleader? How do I put this together? And build from there. The last one, and I'm sure, like y'all can put the pieces together here, right? Like, so we're supportive, we're open and transparent. Like, what does this enable, right? And I think the beauty of creativity, the beauty of the creative process is that you are expressing yourself in the most real way, right? Like you are literally taking something you created and showing it to the world. And just because you're proud of it, and just because you love it, does not mean that everyone is going to be proud of it and love it, right? It is a very raw experience at the core of it, and is a very it's that sort of like, you're out there, right? Like it's you, and it's a part of your soul, and it's something that you are passionate about, and somebody else may not care for it at all, right? And so that trust, that that ability to be the cheerleader no matter what, that ability to be open and honest and thinking through that, is about providing armor for all of your friends' creatives ideas when you are not going to be there, right? Because the whole point is, hey, even if I show this, like I can go talk to James about this. And if it went really well, I can talk to James about this. If it went really bad, I can talk to James about this. And what this starts to open up is that all of those ideas that aren't quite polished, right? All of those ideas that aren't quite fully formed are the ones that those conversations shift to. And so what happens now is you're actually involved in the creative process, and you're involved in the processing of the post display of that creative process, right? Like you become part of that full circle. And so what happens is now you're the confidant, right? And now you're that kind of person who it's like, hey, I can bounce my ideas off you, you can bounce your ideas off me. Everything works well. And this gets to this idea of ultimately have the relationship you want to have. And this is so crucial, right? If you want to be friends with somebody, Maeve, I'm going to pick on you again because you're the top image in my screen. But let's say Maeve and I want to be friends, or I want to be friends with Maeve. Obviously within reason, but if Maeve's like, hey, you know, like, it's fine if I talk to James, it's not really a big deal. But like, I can still treat Maeve like a friend, even if she doesn't treat me like a friend, right? I can still treat all of you like a connection and honesty and sincerity, and provide that openness and safe space, regardless of if you do that to me, right? And this is about breaking down where we have our biases and we have our self-conscious, sort of like that inner voice, like the bad Jiminy Cricket, I like to call it. But getting your ego out of the dynamic of a relationship, I think is really, really powerful. And so the persona to adopt here is, I am my better self. And this is honestly, this is the hardest one, right? Is because you're gonna fall on old habits. You're gonna fall on like, well, who's another voice in here? Oh, sorry. You're gonna call like John. Like John is, you know, like John's not treating me the way I want to be treated. I'm sure John, you're great. You know, of course you are. No, he's like, oh, what the heck? But like, let's say John isn't treating me the way I want to be treated. I can still treat John how I want to have that relationship with him. I can still be open. And the whole point is that taking that experience out, you're creating an opportunity for a real dialogue to happen. So tying this all together, and from memory, so excuse me, but like you think about how those four personas stack up, right? So number one, we started with good intent. And actually, I'm gonna, for the sake of this being a visual overlay, I'm just gonna keep it on this slide. We started off with, I have good intent in how I wanna build this relationship and how I wanna provide and cultivate this dynamic between two people, right? We then moved to, all right, what am I curious about? What are they curious about? How are we gonna work together? And what are the things that we're gonna talk about that aren't a measure of my ability or their ability, right? Number three is, how was I supportive no matter what the outcome was, right? So now we have good intent. I structurally am curious about you. It's not about competition. I am there to support you no matter what the outcome is. So there's that security. And now we're moving into this principle of, I am having a relationship with you that is genuine and honest and secure. And I'm going to do that regardless of what you mirror back to me, right? And those four things are a lot of the ways that I've helped go from taking something that I really want to be true, or like somebody that I've met, like I've actually met John in person, and he's like a wonderful human being. So like I've met John in person, right? And I met John and I was like, John, you know, like you're a wonderful human being. Like I want to find ways to talk to you, right? And I want to find that kind of moment because I see something there. There's this moment where I'm like, I'm genuinely interested in you as a human being. And you take this and there's a progression and you sort of build this up over time, and it gets you to this place where now, you know, John can bounce some ideas off of me. I can bounce some ideas off of him. We have a dynamic that is respectful sincere, and not about whether or not he wins or I win. It's about whether or not that idea is fun and interesting and a good one. And that's that sort of magical space where creativity can blossom. And I think that those sort of 4 steps and these sort of 4 hats, if you just kind of keep that in the back of your head as you build relationships, they'll help you get to where you want to be.